You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading, in case I got bored.
Welcome to TFM's Books and Comic Show for Star Trek. I am one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and so excited that back with me is the one, the only, the not-so-scaly Bruce Gibson.
Yeah, I use a lot of cream, like, moisturizer, so I'm not too scaly, and it's working. Yeah,
it is. I was going to say, we should be sponsored by Olay because your skin is looking wonderfully radiant and absolutely not scaly. So, no dinosaur-like, skin for you.
No, and my teeth are nice and sharp and clean.
Oh, nice. Did you get that teeth sharpener from Quark?
Yeah, actually, I did. I just rubbed his ears and he gave me one. Well.
Before we go too far down that road, we're excited to be here at Literary Treks. We're going to be continuing here with the Typhon Pact series, which has been really fun to get into. And then the next show we'll be doing, should have Una McCormick coming up with Chris as they talk about the brand new Discovery book. And then we'll be returning to The Lost Years. And then we have another new book that's going to be coming out in the Prime universe with the TOS crew, but during the movie era with Christopher L. Bennett's book, Living Memory, I believe is what it's called.
Yes.
So excited to do that. So much happening here with Literary Treks, and we're excited to be here, but we don't have any news today because there aren't any comics or anything to cover. And so we're going to dive into the show in just a second, but just wanted to remind you, of course, that you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you like Literary Treks and what we're doing here, give us a star rating review on Apple Podcasts, help the show grow. You can also, of course, find us on Twitter at TrekFM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. There's a listeners-only discussion group you can find called the Babel Conference. You can join and talk to listeners from all over the world with what's going on here on the network. And, of course, you can go over to trek.fm and see all of the shows we're doing. And maybe you want to send us an email. You go to trek.fm/contact. That's a great place to go. And we do want to say we've got some great associate producers here through Patreon, Greg Rosier and Casey Petit. We really appreciate their support of the network and Literary Treks to make sure all of the shows keep coming to you. And if you do like what we're doing, you can help make sure that comes to you each and every week. Kind of a little bit like PBS. If you like the fact that we're not doing commercials here on our shows, well, it costs money to do this, and we need your help. So go to patreon.com/TrekFM, and you can see how you can be part of the team. And in the end, honestly, every little bit helps. We got some great contribution levels, and we've also got some things that are behind the paywall that it would be worth for you to join in. So again, go to patreon.com/TrekFM and you can see how you can help us out. Bruce, I don't know. Do you think maybe we should just dive into Seize the Fire?
I'm ready to dive in, scales and all.
So, Bruce, this Typhon Pact series book, all of them are kind of focusing on members of the Typhon Pact. And this one is the book where we are really going to be focusing on the Gorn. And, I always found the Gorn interesting. I was a big fan of dinosaurs as a kid, so it was always fun to see them at TOS, and we only really get that one episode. But as a series, of course, they came back in Enterprise a little bit, and it's fascinating just to kind of think of them as a race. But this book, we really dig into who they are as a race, how their race kind of has set up their society. And to me, this was really the best part of the book, was getting to know the Gorn better. Getting to know Gorn.
Really? We're going to sing?
Well, that's the only part I'm going to sing. So
you always sing. You're such a good singer.
I don't know about that, but anyway. To me, this was really interesting, and one of the biggest things we find is that the Gorn are, in some ways, kind of like Kryptonians from like Man of Steel, where everybody is born into a specific caste. So you are a part of these main castes, like the warrior caste, the technological class, or the political class, and then those are broken out into different areas as well, so you kind of can be more specialized. And to me, that was really fascinating to learn.
It's like the last book that we did, Rough Beast of the Empire. The one thing we really liked about that book is about the Romulan storyline. And yes, in this book, my favorite part is the Gorn storyline, getting to know the Gorn better, like you sang. And just hearing about the different casts, and also that there's different types of Gorn just in appearance, physical Gorn look,
yes.
Because like you said, I mean, we've seen in TOS the Gorn, and of course the animated series we saw Gorn, but then the Gorn we saw in Enterprise look a little different. And then there's like the video games and some other things where we've seen Gorn that look different. And so, of course, I think it's even pointed out here, it's like the Xindi. I think it was in this book they mentioned. It's very similar to that, where you have different looking Gorn. And so you have the different cast, and in these casts, they all look different from another cast or whatever. I found that really to be interesting, because that's the thing I love about these books, is it gives you more depth into species that we don't get that much detail on in the TV series.
Yeah, to me, that was something that was fascinating to see, that the Gorn species, obviously, you have this relationship between two Gorn that we have, and look, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Gorn names in this. We'll get to that.
I was hoping you would, because I can't.
that was. No, I'm not going to do it. But we do have a relationship between two Gorn who have been kind of like star-crossed lovers, in the sense that there is the story set up for the Gorn is that one of their main hatcheries on a planet is destroyed by a basically starburst from the local sun in that area. And it basically, the radiation fries the planet. And so the whole point is that and why they're all the way out where the Titan is in the Beta Quadrant, is they're looking for a new place that could become a hatchery, and it's for the warrior caste. So this is obviously very important to them. If they can't find a new hatchery for the warrior caste, they're going to be in some real trouble, especially when it comes to they're going to be feeling more subservient to the Typhon Pact. They're going to feel weaker as a society because they don't have this warrior caste, and they have to have a very specific setup of the planet, in the sense of its humidity levels, and it has to be a very specific type of climate,
right? And
if they can't find that, then maybe they can somehow kind of terraform to get that. And so they're really worried about this. And so you have these star-crossed lovers, and that one of the people was on a ship, and that ship survived. That has the last people that survived that cataclysm there at the warrior caste hatchery, and they've got some defects because now of radiation poisoning and all this. But again, what I'm trying to get to in all of that is that we learned that these two characters, they're bonded, which made me really wonder, is we have these hatcheries, but we didn't really get into as to exactly how bonding between two Gorn work, and do they then create their own families, or is every Gorn just born of a hatchery? Like, are there any Gorn that are born of the relationship then between a couple, or is every Gorn basically genetically engineered in a hatchery? That's one thing I felt like the book didn't answer, which I was wondering, how does this really work? Because that was one thing that we don't quite get any details on.
Yeah, that's true. That was never really answered. I guess I just assumed that it's the hatchery is the only way that they procreate. But in a lot of ways, just thinking about the hatchery made me think of Camino and the clones in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, not everyone's a clone in that universe. You can do it that way, or you can create life in the natural way.
Mm-hmm.
I would almost assume that Gorn should be able to mate and create children. But I guess if you're trying to create a certain caste on a mass scale, that they almost do this hatchery like clone like thing like we saw in Star Wars with the Clone Wars. It's like you want that warrior caste, then you're going to create this hatchery of warrior caste beings as opposed to waiting for people to just procreate their own life. But you're right, that was never really addressed.
Well, and maybe wonder, I don't know if you ever saw the show Krypton that was on Sci-Fi Channel.
Yes.
And, they had the whole thing where you can bond, you can be together. And then the genetics from each person in the bonding get taken to create a life, so they don't birth people, but they, so I wonder if it has something to do with that, then your bonding and your genetic material comes together to create somebody in the hatchery, So again, it was one of those things where I found this really fascinating, and in the end, I just wanted more information about this, not because I'm really into Gorn mating habits, but it was interesting to see how the society actually worked, and I felt like we got some good information, but it wasn't complete yet. And so I almost just wish the whole book had just been about the Gorn.
Well, now that I'm thinking about it, didn't the one Gorn captain wanted to mate with that woman?
Yes.
So they can't, because wasn't it that they wanted to mate so that they could create an offspring that I guess that they would clone in a sense?
See, and that's what I couldn't figure out, because look, I know that his desire, this captain of this ship, and he was one of the people who had escaped from the hatchery and had the radiation poison, and had kind of been driven almost insane by it, wanted to create a new warrior caste, a better warrior caste. But there wasn't a sense that I ever got from the book of exactly how that was going to happen, because they were still looking to create a new hatchery planet. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed as though somehow maybe it's combined, but it wasn't necessarily that, and I never got the feeling that it was going to come down to them two and their quote-unquote off-screen.
But the other Captain Gorn, didn't he want to mate with the other guy's girlfriend? And that's one reason why she was against him and trying to leave, because he wanted to mate with her to create his own caste of warriors, I think. I remember her wanting to get away from him and not touch her, and she then eventually got to the Titan.
Yeah, I that's where the details I feel like of this get a little fuzzy as it, again, how it all works. But I thought it was interesting too that what we learned then is that each of the castes of Gorn, their hatchery planets, need to have a specific climate and be a specific temperature and all these type of things to create this. And I thought it was fascinating that because of that, the specifics for the warrior caste are so specific that there are very few planets like this. And in fact, they're in danger of never finding another planet like this, because this one was basically so special. And so this is one of the reasons why the Gorn running across this terraforming platform in the Beta Quadrant have them so intrigued, because, obviously they believe this can help create and remake a world just like the one they lost. So for them, they found the Gorn Holy Grail.
Yeah, this is like a Genesis device.
Yes.
So yeah, it could terraform.
Yes.
And the thing about it is this one special planet that got destroyed for all case and anyway, the radiation that affected it, that was a special warrior caste. There's other warrior castes, but they're not as strong. They're as weak. So they're worried about the Gorn getting weak and having not so strong warrior caste. This is the ultimate warrior caste that has been destroyed that they need to start over again. And yes, that planet needs to have that certain environment for them to recreate that type of caste. And so this machine that could redo the planet into this environment that is needed is like the Genesis device, meaning it can not just create life, but can destroy the life that could be on the planet. And of course, the Titan is very interested in this too, because what they just went through with the Borg destroying worlds, they could use this device to bring new life to those worlds. So there's interest on the Gorn side and the Federation side for this device. And do you keep the device and use it because it's dangerous at the same time, or do you destroy it?
Yeah, I like that you bring that up, this whole question of, and obviously they name it after a couple of Hindu gods, creation and destruction. And this idea of what do we do with this type of technology? And obviously, this is one of the first times I feel like since Genesis, we're playing with this idea. And like you said, I really love is that from both sides, from Starfleet to the Gorn, you have a reason for wanting this type of power. Specifically, we keep referring to here Deneva being destroyed. And the idea of being able to remake Deneva and other worlds that have suffered from the Borg invasion, to remake them into worlds that people could live on again much more quickly than, normal terraforming efforts in Starfleet would be able to do. And so the question of power and how and why we use it was really interesting in this book. And I do feel like if there's one detriment to the book, I don't feel like we actually really wrestle with this enough until the very end of the book, when what happens with Tuvok and him, he has mind melded with this structure. It's actually a structure that's almost like a living structure, and has a kind of almost a consciousness to it. And both him and White Blue had kind of tried to meld with it technologically and then mind meld with it with Tuvok. And he's left with the ability, he could basically reconstruct this. And so the question of what do I do with this power? Do I bring it to light to Starfleet? Do I bring it to light so that we can create more of these machines so that we could remake these worlds? Or do I just let this die because it's too dangerous? And I was disappointed that question, which I felt like the entire book would have been interesting to wrestle with, is left as a cliffhanger for the very end.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of the last book too. Like, I didn't feel like everything was resolved like I wanted things to be. It just kind of lets things out there open-ended at the end. And I don't recall, but when we get to other books, maybe it helps to resolve those things. But, I mean, to your point, what Tuvok has gone through, it really is that decision of, now that we have the technology, the understanding to build this device, should we do that? It could help to reinvigorate the planets that we lost and bring new life to them. But then the dangerous part of this is someone could come and use this as a weapon. And so do you even tell anybody that you have this knowledge? So that would be an interesting play to play out in the book, at least maybe in the last third of the book or something, and not save it to the very end. But those questions do come up throughout the book. But it's more of, what do we do with the existing device? Do we somehow turn it off, or do we destroy it? And we don't want it to be used on this planet because there's life on this planet and it will destroy that life. So do we transport it away from this planet into somewhere else? And again, it gets back to, but it's a weapon, and the Typhon Pact troops are on their way, and it would have played, it would have been interesting if that situation with Tuvok would have come up, because then it would be really playing the idea of how does he deal with this? What does he do next? How does he struggle with not just those decisions, but all the information that's in his head? How does he handle all that? And we don't really get that. We're informed of it at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that it's a good question, and it is one that, I understand when you have a book series and it's ongoing, you don't have to answer every question because you are, laying seeds for things to continue to get picked up. But I will say that this book and the previous book that we just covered, which Rough Beasts of Empire, I do think both of these kind of suffer from the fact that there's not enough resolution in the book itself. And it feels a little bit too open-ended. And that is a detriment to just being able to, I would say, just pick these books up and enjoy them on their own without having a lot of other meta information. The authors try to do their best to give you what you need in the books, but I would say this book and the last one kind of suffer from not really being as user-friendly, reader-friendly. In that sense. And part of that is that we're not almost telling complete stories. There's enough of this story that wraps up, but, and part of that too is so we have this whole storyline with the other Undercover Starfleet, where they go in the isolation suits because they want to save something of the society on this planet that might be destroyed by the Gorn activating this device. And in some ways, it kind of reminded me of Avatar with their holo technology that they're using with their isolation suits and everything. And of course, we've seen a little bit of that in Insurrection, where they were just actually cloaked, basically. But what did you think of this part of the story? Because of all parts of this book, I found this the most disappointing because I didn't feel like enough really happened to legitimize us spending this much time on this part of the story.
I mean, yeah, this wasn't my favorite part of the story, but I felt like it needed to be dealt with because there is this alien race on this planet that is going to be destroyed if this device is used, and to just talk about them and not really know anything about them would be a little disappointing. So to me, it makes sense that they go down and they investigate them, especially since the fact that they have matter-antimatter technology, which could be used for warp travel, but they've decided not to use it for that. So the question of the Prime Directive comes up, well, they have the warp technology, so can we make first contact with them? Mm-hmm. But even though they're not into space, they're not using it for travel. And so they were saying the Prime Directive isn't really that specific of saying that, well, you have to be able to travel with warp technology. It just says they have to have invented warp technology. So I thought that part was a little interesting. But when they're dealing with this race of beings that kind of look like human, like frog-looking aliens, there wasn't really a whole lot to it, except for they were just not willing to really do anything. They weren't going to leave the planet. They saw this device in the air. They didn't think much of it. And they were just not going to do anything. But yeah, there really isn't much more to it than that. If anything, what I enjoyed most about it is just the exchanges between Vale and Troy. I kind of like how they kind of, in some ways, they're trying not to step on each other's toes.
It's just really interesting because one of the things that I kind of came away from this book is that there is so much going on and yet nothing happening. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because you brought it up, and I feel like, is there just too much going on in this book, or is it something where maybe some things need to be restructured to make the story more streamlined so we could maybe do what we were talking about, where we're spending more time on that really important question with do we use this technology? Do we not use this technology? So because I feel like to me that's the answer with this question. There's so much going on, but not enough is actually really happening that is driving forward the main plot of everything with the Gorn, the Typhon Pact, as well as the Titan, and this major question of, the idea of planets that we could bring back to life. What do you think? Am I off base, or is there just enough going on, or what do you think?
I didn't feel like there was too much going on. I never felt that way. But I'm picking up on a pattern as we're going through these Typhon Pact books, where to me, the story is about the members of the Typhon Pact, the one member. So the previous book we reviewed was about the Romulans. This one's about the Gorn. And then the first book that we did, Zero Sum Game, is about the Breen. And those are always the more interesting parts of the book to me. Although in Zero Sum Game, I really like Bashir and Ezri Dax working a lot together. I did find that to be interesting. But the best part of the book to me was learning about the Breen. And then the last book was about the Romulans. And the interesting part of this book to me is just finding out more about the Gorn. But it's never really about the Typhon Pact. This story could have been told outside of the Typhon Pact because we never saw the Typhon Pact. They're on their way. They're coming. But that's it. Like, you could have just said that's a fleet of Gorn ships coming in for reinforcement.
Right.
It really had nothing to do with the Typhon Pact. The last book kind of did. It had some thing, but again, the focus was on the Romulans. You could have restructured that story. It had nothing to do with the Typhon Pact, and same with the one before. So it feels to me as if the books are saying, hey, let's focus on each member of the Typhon Pact, get to know them better. Oh, and then we'll sprinkle a little open-ended storyline to one of the main Star Trek characters in the book that we can play with later. And that's what they feel like to me. So there really isn't that much about the Titan crew in this until we get to the end. There's something that's left open-ended on two of the members, on Tuvok and White Blue. But outside of that, there really isn't that much going on. To me, it's really more about we're putting the Gorn in this situation so we can learn more about them.
I think you just put your finger on that, though. With everything you're just saying, I think what it is that this is plot first and character second.
Yes.
And that is always a detriment to any storyline. And I would say that regardless of whether I loved how the storyline played out with the characters specifically of like Ezri and Bashir in Zero Sum Game, the rest of that story was all character first, and then the plot worked into what was going with the characters, right? Mm-hmm. That was fantastic. I think these last two books, it has legitimately just been all about these plot movements, and then characters kind of get dragged along with what's happening with the plot instead of the other way around.
Yes.
And I think that's what's made me feeling, frustrated with both of these last two books, really, because you mentioned it, nothing happens with the Titan crew in this story. Like, in the sense that we don't really learn anything about them. There isn't a progression for their stories, really. We allude to the fact that, Tuvok is still dealing with the loss of their son and everything. But there isn't anything in there. There's no growth for Troy or Riker or any of the characters here. And it's disappointing. I think when you pick up a book that has Riker's face on it and Tuvok's face on it, you would expect to kind of learn something about those characters, and we just don't really do that.
No, but then again, a lot of Star Trek is that way. I mean, you watch an episode and, the characters are still the characters. I mean, I've read so many TOS novels and it's still...
this is true.
Yeah, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy at the very end. We didn't really learn that much about them. But, but that's what makes a really good book, though, is if you do something like that with the characters, because it really stood out to me, too, because when I finished this book, and I did enjoy the book, but when I finished this book, I went straight to Star Trek Discovery Wonderlands by Una McCormick, the one we're going to be discussing here on the show soon with Una. The thing about it is that is all character. I mean, I started reading it and I was really enjoying it because I'm learning so much about Michael Burnham and the growth of her character and what she's going through. And I was like, wow, I'm invested in her. But I didn't feel invested in every character in this book.
Right.
You know, I was invested in the Gorn. I was very interested in how the Gorn played out. And I knew that they probably weren't going to destroy the planet with this machine. But, you know, that would have been interesting if they did. But again, it was just really learning about the Gorn.
Yeah, I think, you know, you're absolutely right. It is definitely a frustration. And I think, you know, for me personally, that's one of the reasons why I've always gravitated towards Deep Space Nine for Star Trek, you know, even in the normal everyday episodes, right? You know, the quote unquote everyday episode. You're learning something about the characters that you didn't know before, you know, and they're using that as a way to progress their storylines. I think Enterprise actually did a pretty good job of that as well, even in its first few seasons, like where you would have those abilities to connect between the different characters and growth. You'd always learn something in one of the episodes about one of the characters that kind of moved you along. So, and that's so important when we're doing these type of stories. So I did want to ask you one thing. So one of the things that we do kind of get here, and it's a thematic element that was interesting, was this idea of diversity. You know, obviously the Titan is the most diverse crew, but we kind of have this question of, is there a point to which diversity goes too far, in the sense that, like, people are not ready to accept that. And that really comes with our interaction between the Starfleet crew and the Gorn themselves. And that the Gorn specifically would not be comfortable with a mammal crew, or a mostly mammal crew. They just wouldn't be comfortable with that. And they couldn't make themselves necessarily comfortable with that without maybe years of acclimation. And so to me, that was something that was really interesting, I felt, in this book. And I almost would have liked maybe even more of that as a discussion, because I think it is a really interesting question, especially since most of the Gorn have this thought process of what the Federation is like, which is basically kind of what the Klingons say in Star Trek VI, which is a Homo sapiens only club. And what they've kind of realized because of their interactions is that's not necessarily the case, which was really neat. Like, we're seeing that obviously the Federation is advanced and is much different than what people think from the outside. I just wanted, I think, more of that, because I think that's a really cool theme to be discussing, especially with Titan.
I like how they beam over that one Gorn guy, because we're not going to pronounce names. But actually, I think his name is Gogresh. Something. Was it him?
Yeah, something along
No,
those
it wasn't
lines,
that
yeah.
guy. It was another one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. One of these, something like that. But anyway, when he beams over, he's just amazed that, because what they did is when they bring him into the ship, he freaks out when he sees mammals, like, you know, Nursagawa and Riker coming in with Troy, and he like kind of passes out again. And then this time they're like, okay, we should only have reptilian type of members of the crew in here, of course with Dr. Ree, who was there to begin with. And he wakes up and he sees all these reptiles, and they all look a little different. Some look kind of Gorn and some don't, and that just kind of confuses him. But it's like, okay, these aren't all mammals. And I thought it was interesting how the Gorn, now in the 24th century, has no idea that the Federation is made up of all these different species, that they're not all just these mammals. But then at the same time, there's something where Riker's talking about that seems like every species has another species that creates fear in them that they're afraid of. And it's just natural for humans to be afraid of reptiles and lizard type creatures and stuff. And that's a prejudice, and that's something that they have to logically tell themselves not to freak out about. So I thought that was interesting that it goes both ways. The reptiles are afraid of the mammals, and the mammals are afraid of the reptiles.
Yeah, and I think it makes for, and one of the things that I really liked was them talking about that idea of that we as beings in general, regardless of what type of being we are, that we do have an innate reaction.
Right.
We do have an innate response. And it's not necessarily tied to some kind of like racism, right? It's just this like innate thing that happens. And it definitely makes sense, obviously, with Star Trek, when you do have all of these type of beings that from completely different types of worlds, and it's not necessarily anything about other. It's basically just this natural response. It is something that is natural, and then and what really overcomes that then is the beautiful thing that we kind of see play out in the book, which is overcoming that by getting to know one another, having conversations, everything that the Federation is about, right? Like, let's get to know one another. And therefore then we can overcome those natural responses with intellectual responses, because yes, my first inclination may be this, but now I know you. Now we know one another, and that knowledge trumps those things. And I think that's really beautiful, that knowledge can actually help us overcome those type of issues. And I really wish that the book had really dove even further into this, because I think this is the type of theme that Titan specifically can really excel in.
And as we're talking through this, I'm thinking more and more about Dr. Ree and how he really could have been utilized quite a bit in this. This could have been a Ree story, because it could have been where they're finding the crew of Titans finding out that the Gorn are not so accepting of mammals. And so they kind of have Ree then take over almost as like in a command position and put him on the bridge. And Riker's almost like talking in his ear and telling him what to do, and putting Ree in a command situation, seeing how a doctor is trying to accommodate with trying to help this situation and from a command standpoint. And you could have made this whole character story of Ree by kind of putting him in an awkward situation and trying to deal with other beings that look like him but aren't him. It's like, I'm not a Gorn, so don't expect me to be a Gorn, but I can help you maybe with this, Something like that would have been interesting.
I think you just nailed one of my earlier questions. Like, is there too much going on, or should we have a restructuring or whatever? I think you're absolutely right. This should have been the book where we dove into Dr. Ree and we learned his history and that this struggle and everything about it. Absolutely. I think that's perfect, Bruce. I mean, and in one of these, in that sense, I feel like that's where this book specifically, you needed to, it needed a re-editing. It needed somebody to come in and basically say what you just said. Let's focus. What's the focus for this, for the Titan crew? And where are we keying in on character? That's it. Perfect. So, because the other thing that I really appreciated about this book, we talked a lot about the fact of what we learned about the Gorn and how they need their hatchery planets to be a specific way. And what we learn here is that it doesn't have to be that way. They can evolve. Mm-hmm. And so this whole idea of evolving and when to evolve, and what I thought was really interesting is the Gorn are being forced to adapt, but the adaptation could have happened years ago, like centuries ago. Like, they could have always adapted. And so what it really came down to the question of is when to know when you should adapt, how you should adapt and when to hold on to specific traditions really becomes important. And again, this is one of those places where it's like it's a great theme. It kind of gets played out a little bit at the end of the book, but I wish the entire book had been building into this much more so that it was a much stronger theme throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, it's making me wonder more and more if the approach to these books was let's just focus on the different groups of the Typhon Pact and not make this so much about our main characters. Because it does seem to be the theme going through each one of these books. And then, because even the last book, it's like, okay, I'm interested in what happened to what's going to happen to Sisko next. Now that he's, left his wife behind and his child behind, and he's now the captain of the Robinson, and he seems to be coming to terms with some things about himself. What next? And now it's this, what's next with Tuvok? What's next with White Blue? But you don't really get to that till the end of the book. It seems, again, it's all focused on the other stuff. So, I don't know. Let's get to the next Typhon book now, because I want to know what I know I've read these before, but I don't remember them all in that detail.
Yeah, and it's interesting because just in my memory, I remember Paths of Disharmony being very focused, and it's specifically because we're dealing with the Andorians and an issue that's happening with them, which was, I remember being fantastic. And so, yeah, I think I think one of the things, so just maybe before we kind of get to ratings, I think to kind of sum up some of the things that we've been talking about, I feel like that if you had keyed in on what are the thematic elements that play across from the Titan crew to the Gorn, and then use Dr. Ree as our avatar for the Titan crew, as in who we were going to be seeing the story through his eyes, the interactions with the Gorn mainly through his eyes, and then using this as an opportunity to really get to know his story, almost in the same way as like in Enterprise, where you have like Dear Doctor, and you use that as the opportunity to really get to know Phlox.
Yep.
That's what we should have made this story. This story should have been Ree's story, and then that gives us a great, interesting juxtaposition then with the Gorn and everything. I think if you've done those things, and then that gives you kind of a restructuring here of the book, and a restructuring of the storylines. If it had been those things, I think this book could have been super successful, because it has some great ideas here. But the problem is that what we've talked about idea-wise is none of them really play out or pay off even by the end of the book.
Yeah, I don't want to really tell authors what they should do or what I would do necessarily. I'm just thinking brainstorming some ideas, but I feel as if you're going to do a book like this, and if you want to get something more about our main characters, give them something more to do or learn something more to them, find parallels to the story. So the story is the Gorn trying to have this hatchery for their eggs. It's to produce more Gorn. It's to produce life. And it would have been interesting if maybe this is the point that we see Riker and Troy revisiting having another child. And they're trying to decide if they should bring another child into this world. Something to that effect. So you have that storyline going on with the Gorn storyline, and both are about creating life.
I do. I think that's good. And look, I don't think neither Bruce or I are sitting here trying to be jerks and to say, oh, you should do this. I think part of this is, obviously, Bruce and I have spent years reading a lot of Star Trek books. And so I think we do have quite a bit of experience in that, and so there have been obviously Star Trek books that are more successful than others. And so I think for both of us, this one hasn't been quite as successful as we feel like it could have been. And in talking about this, that's what makes it fun, right? We want to talk through the things that we feel like that we liked, and be honest about the things we didn't like, and exactly why that is. And so we never want to just tear something down to be mean. We also want to be, I think, constructively critical And so for us, that's been the process for, I think, honestly, the last 2 books. And so I am really interested, Bruce, in what you end up rating Seize the Fire.
Well, it's funny because sometimes, we get on these shows and we'll start picking something apart. And then I'm like, well, but I really did like it. It's like, I mean, sure, we didn't maybe get much character growth out of the Titan crew, but I did enjoy seeing the Titan crew and revisiting with them again. Again, the Gorn, that was the thing I really enjoyed. I mean, I enjoyed this book because I like to see more of the Gorn. We don't really get that many Gorn stories, and we learned a lot about the caste system and the different species of Gorn and the whole hatchery thing and how they produce their different castes, and that there's different planets with different hatcheries of eggs. And I just found the whole thing really to be interesting when it comes to the Gorn. So that's I walked away from this as like reading a Gorn encyclopedia in a sense that was displayed to me in a story form. So I enjoyed it. And I'm curious to see what happens to Tuvok and White Blue later, which I've read the books before, but I don't remember all the details. So, I would say that out of a hatchery of 100 eggs, there's probably about, a couple dozen that are cracked and broke. The rest are fine.
I think the last book I gave 2 out of 5. And I think I would give this one 2.5 out of 5 because it is definitely a little bit, I would say it's like half a good book. There's like half of this that I'm like, yes. So especially, and again, like you said, it's the Gorn stuff that I'm super interested in and want to continue to know more about, and I wish it was even more fleshed out. So, it just, in the end, I think it just failed for me in the sense of being a good Star Trek book. And part of what I come to a Star Trek book for is really getting the opportunity to dig into the characters to which I love. And so hopefully, as we get into Paths of Disharmony, we'll get more of that. Of course, we've got Wonderlands coming up with Una, and then Flag Full of Stars, and then so much more coming to you. So that'll be really fun. And we'll see what comes next.
Yeah, so the next book that we're going to get to in the Typhon Pact, I'm really interested because, like you said, it focuses on the Andorians, and I do recall really liking that one. And I think we learn a lot about the Andorians, so that should be interesting.
Well, Bruce, as always, regardless of whether we love the book or we don't love the book, it is always so much fun to get a chance to talk about Star Trek books and comics with you. And I'm really excited for what we do have coming up this year because we really do have a packed schedule, and it's just great to be able to bring people more episodes of Literary Treks. But if people want to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex. That's Admiral with the underline Rex. I'm also on Instagram at Admiral Rex, but I don't really post much there, but I am in there. And you can find me on Positively Trek with Dan Gunther, talking about books, comics, episodes, movies, collecting, anything Star Trek related. We talk about it there. And then I'm also occasionally on the Star Wars Report podcast, and we talk about Star Wars on there, surprisingly enough, right?
That's shocking. And you could find me all over the place on social media under the name MattRushing02. Here in the network, of course, doing The Orb with Chris Jones, where we talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. You can also find me doing the 602 Club, which is our general geek show, talking about all of the fandoms outside Star Trek that we love. Plus, in that same feed, you can find Snyder Cuts with John Mills and I talking about all of the works of Zack Snyder that he's directed. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network. I have 2 shows over there. One is called Owl Post, I did with Drea Kaufman. We wrapped up the entire Harry Potter series. We did that one chapter at a time. And then I'm doing Aggressive Negotiations over there with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.